This is a tier list of all the enemies in Dicey dungeons. I wanted to rank them by difficulty and how likely I think they are to beat me, or how manageable it is to beat them in any given run that I encounter them in the game. And I wanted to go tier by tier from the bottom tier all the way up to the top in each category of difficulty for these enemies. I'll also be explaining some of the mechanics of the game as I go. Starting up at the bottom, it's Garbage Goons. So these are all the floor 1 enemies, and on the first floor of Dicey Dungeons, all you have to do is fight 2 enemies and you'll level up, and when you level up you heal any damage. So most of them are not very likely to be able to kill you, although a couple certainly might be able to. I think the strongest enemy in this tier is the Frog. It has 2 pieces of equipment: the Broadsword, which does open damage plus 2, and the Small Shield, which takes a max of 3. Open damage is just an equipment that takes any dice, and the damage will be based on the value of the die. So it takes a max of 6, and the sword has a plus 2 to it. It could do as much as 8 damage. Since your character has all characters start with 14 HP, Frog could conceivably kill you in 2 turns, but he probably won't. And the shield will give him a maximum of 3 shield. Shield is very simple. For every shield you have, it mitigates 1 damage, and you can keep your shield as long for as many turns as you want until the enemy damages it enough to remove it. So Frog might kill you and might get some shield too, but Frog is still only floor 1. The next enemy is the Slime. It has 2 slime balls, which for any even dice will add 2 poison. Poison works pretty simply. Say it got 2 even dice, it'll do 4 poison damage to you, and at the start of your turn you'll take 4 damage, and then the poison will drop by 1. So the next turn you would take 3 damage, but the slime could keep rolling even dice, and it gets about 3 dice, which means it has a decent chance of rolling a couple of at least 1 slime ball. Because poison stacks, it has a chance to kill you if it rolls well, and you can't kill it fast enough, but still not a great chance. The Magician has 2 pieces of equipment. For an even dice, he uses Magic Missile, which does 5 damage, and for any odd dice, he has Magic Shield, which also gives 3 shield. So like the Frog, the Magician can pretty easily do some damage, add some shield to himself, and might cause a bit of a problem. And the other thing is that he can always use at least 1 of his equipment. Robobot has a ray gun. It does 3 damage, takes a minimum of 3, and can be used 3 times. So could roll as much as 9 damage. Even though the Robobot could potentially do more damage than the Magician, its rolls might just not be good enough, and he could miss his turn, whereas the Magician can always do something with his dice rolls. Rose is a bit of a rarer enemy. He has 1 equipment, the Rosewood Spear, which does even damage and gives it 2 thorns. If a character has a thorn, attacking them will deal 1 damage to the attacker for every thorn the target has. So it gets 2 thorns, and now every attack you do will do 2 damage back to you. But all you have to do is clear the enemies on the floor, you heal, and you get rid of whatever damage it did to you, and you only need a few hits to take out the Rose. So even though it could do as much as 6 damage plus 2 thorns on itself, it's still not a very strong enemy. Hothead has two fireballs, which will do even damage plus 1 burn to you, as much as 6 damage. It could just roll a bunch of odd dice and miss its turn, but otherwise it does some damage. And the way burn works, one of your dice is burned and it costs 2 HP to use it. So it could use some damage. It could do some damage, but like most of the enemies on this floor, it doesn't have a great chance to defeat you. And of course I made a mistake. The Hothead only has 1 fireball. The Gardener has exactly 1 equipment. It's the shovel. It'll do open damage, and if it rolls a 6, it'll weaken you. Weaken is a status that will cause one of your equipment to be weakened at random. Every single equipment in the game has an upgraded state, which will improve its capabilities, and a weakened state, which will make it worse. It could either do less damage, require a more restrictive dice, lose the secondary effects of the equipment, or even lose the damage it does. And the weaken you're hit with is random. It's a bit of a problem that could hurt you against stronger enemies, but not when the Gardener has to do 3 max roll hits to kill you, and doesn't even guarantee to weaken you with its equipment. And the last enemy in this lowest floor is the Space Marine. Has exactly 1 equipment. It's the Plasma Cannon, which requires a countdown of 20. A countdown equipment will require you to put dice into it. For example, a 6 will lower its countdown by 6, or 4 will drop its countdown by 4. And you can reduce the countdown on equipment for however many turns you need to until it hits 0, and then it'll do its effect. And the Plasma Cannon does 10 damage, which means after multiple rolls the Space Marine might need to roll enough to hit 20, it can't even kill you. And in fact, because the damage you take will charge your limit break, you can kind of just charge your limit break on a lot of these enemies before you move on to the next floor. The Space Marine might not even be able to hurt you. I initially had maybe another enemy or 2 in the next tier, the Floor 1 Wonders, but I've decided that there is only one wonder, and that's the Wolf Puppy. Has 2 equipment. The Woof 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 is an 8 countdown, and it gives Fury. And then if you have Fury, you can use it twice. So then the Wolf Puppy has a Bite attack, which for an even dice does 4 damage. So the Wolf Puppy could do 4 damage, and then in over 2 turns reduce the countdown on the other move, get Fury, and then it can do 2 hits at 4 damage each. And of course that only adds up to 12 damage, but if you were damaged by another enemy before that, you are more than likely to die. So even though the Wolf Puppy can't guarantee kill you from that move, it's still probably doing the most damage of any enemy on this floor. I've definitely died to a couple of these enemies, especially on higher difficulties, probably the Slime and the Puppy and maybe the Frog most frequently. Next up I have Lucky Lackeys. These are 2 enemies that I actually think are pretty fortunate to run into. For the one that's a bit more ambiguous, it's the Rotten Apple. This shows up on the higher floors around 4 or 5. Worm Bite, it needs absolutely any dice, and it does 1 damage. By its other equipment, Rotten Core, it does a countdown of 16 and then it halves your health. So the apple almost will never be able to kill you itself, but it'll make you a lot weaker for another enemy you have to fight. if you have to run into the apple and then fight another enemy to get to the next floor or to level up, you're in huge trouble. And that certainly might have happened to me once or twice, but as of recently, I've been mostly running into the rotten apple on the lower floors where I can route my encounters however I want, and to the point where the apple is the last enemy I fight, in which case it almost can never kill me anyway, and it's a pretty easy enemy to defeat. It has over 40 health, which is quite a lot for an enemy, so it is going to almost guaranteed get off the half health move and be a bit of trouble to take down. But I still think it really only depends on whether you run into it in a way where you can control when you fight the apple. And on top of all that, the apple takes the form of an apple on the floor that you normally want to eat. So if you don't know it's an enemy, you might just run into it. If you see what looks like more apples than there should be on the floor, or there's an enemy short on the floor, then you might have an apple to fight. The other enemy that I think is a pretty good one to run into is Sticky Hands. Sticky Hands shows up on floor 2, possibly 3. He's a kid that has 2 equipment. The first is Thief, or something. For an even dice, it steals 1 gold for you, but if you defeat him, if you defeat him, you get it back, and then you get the gold that you would get from beating him anyway. And the other one is, for a countdown of 20, he runs away. And not only does he leave battle, he escapes the floor. So you've lost a gold, and you've also lost the ability to hit max level, because you have to defeat every enemy to hit max level. But I've literally never lost to Sticky Hands. He has 1 dice, so you have, if he rolled perfectly, you have about 4 turns to beat Sticky Hands. The first turn he rolls he steals a gold. The next 3 turns he rolls 6s, and the 5th turn runs away successfully. So, especially if you can inflict shock or freeze or something, or another status on Sticky Hands, then he's zero trouble. And since he literally can't damage you, it's good to sometimes fight him if you're low on health, or if you're about to go on to the next floor, because you don't even have to worry about dying to him. D tier, it's the Dubious Doofs. We're now getting into territory of enemies that are more likely to be able to kill you, but most of these I still consider pretty easy to take out. I think the strongest, or at least the one that I've fought the most, is the Stereo Head. Has 2 Sonic Wave, which will take a max of 4 damage and guaranteed weaken you, unless he rolls too high to use one of the equipment. You're taking a bit of damage, and also 1 or 2 of your equipment is weakened every turn. You fight this enemy quite a lot on the floor, and I usually get out of it. The next one is the Wizard, and the Wizard is one of the more versatile enemies you could run into. Has a spell for every die face, so no matter what he rolls, he does something. The first 4 numbers are a flame, freeze, freeze, flame, poison, and shock spells. They do 5 damage and 2 status on you, except for the poison spell, which does 4 poison. Since poison will damage you every turn, it does a little bit less damage than the others. Freeze, if you're frozen, one of your dice will be dropped to a 1. It'll be whatever your highest dice is, and the Wizard can freeze 2 dice. Burn, your dice are burned and you take damage to use it. You should almost always be using your burned dice. If you don't, then it just gives the enemy more opportunities to hurt you, to hit you, and potentially defeat you. And the enemies will always take damage from burned dice unless the damage would kill them outright. The other status of those 4 is shock. If you're shocked, then one of your equipment will be disabled at random. Use it again, you have to put a dice in the equipment. So is it worth it to free the equipment and lose a dice for it, or do you save the dice and you don't get to use the equipment? Either way, you're playing less optimally for that turn, which can make shock a pretty bad deal to run into. The 5 is a teleport spell. It gives the wizard dodge, and if an enemy dodges, then whatever attack first hits them will miss entirely. All you have to do to deal with a dodging enemy is to throw a weaker attack at them to get rid of the dodge, and then you can attack them normally. It shouldn't be that hard to deal with, especially when there's a bright yellow dodge icon right on the interface of the enemy's name, right there on screen for you to see. The 6 is the Hall of Mirrors, which will give the wizard an extra dice. And the wizard having 2 or more dice could be pretty scary because he uses multiple spells every turn. But the thing is, if the wizard rolls a 6, he can't actually do anything to you because he's just spending it to get another dice. So it's possible if the wizard rolls a 6, then you might just get enough time to beat the wizard before he can do too much damage to you. I was a bit surprised when I thought of the wizard in such a low tier, but just beat him fast enough before he gets too many spells off, and that's why I think he's in one of the lower tiers, albeit probably one of the strongest in this tier. The Dryad has 2 equipment, the Venus Flytrap, which will do open damage and recover 2 HP on a 6. Could do a little bit of damage, recover a bit of HP, and then there's this Poison Slingshot, which for a countdown of 12 will inflict 4 poison on you. Over a couple of turns that could get to be a little bit of damage, and the Venus Flytrap could be strong too. So the Dryad is potentially okay at dealing damage, and I'm sure I've wiped it before, but still a floor 2 enemy, occasionally shows up on floor 3, and anytime I run into her, I'm not really that worried. The Wicker Man shows up on the higher floors, somewhere around usually 3 or 4, possibly 5, I think. Has the same equipment as the Dryad, actually, the Venus Flytrap, and also a more unique equipment, the Wicker Staff, which is a countdown of 12, does 9 damage and 2 burn, which maybe once or twice that I've run into a Wicker Man felt like a lot of damage, but nowadays I run into this guy, not really that worried about it. Could do some moderate damage to you, but really the thing is that the Wicker Man is weak to fire. There are a couple of enemies in the game with a elemental weakness, and if you hit them with that weakness, they take double damage. So anytime you get a fire equipment, you see a Wicker Man, you can just burn him to ashes, and it's pretty easy to beat him. But even without fire damage, I think the Wicker Man is not that difficult to take out for how high of a floor the enemy appears on. The Alchemist has 4 potions with a countdown of 8 each. The Spiky Potion does 8 damage, the Toxic Potion does 5 poison, the Fire Potion does 8 damage and also burns all your dice, which is a bit of a problem. And then the Bear Potion, which gains 12 HP, and then the Alchemist becomes a bear and can use some decently powerful claw attacks on you. The Alchemist is going to go through their entire potion roster until they transform into a bear. So you're trying to beat the Alchemist before she can use all those potions. You can freeze her dice, shock her to try to disable one of the potions. Has a couple of equipment with a lot of damage, but still kind of one of the lower floors of enemies that you have to deal with. And there's a funny challenge you can do in the game where if you play as a thief, you can steal the bear potion and then you can become a bear. There's an achievement for it, and there might be some more equipment you can use to play as a bear. A pirate has 2 equipment: the hook, which will do a maximum of 5 damage, whatever dice you put in it. If you use a 4, you can reuse the equipment. So could do some direct damage with the hook. And then there's the cannon with a countdown of 8 that does 6 damage and 1 burn. Okay damage for the pirate, especially if he gets big rolls with the hook, but still not that scary. The haunted jar is another enemy that appears on some of the higher floors, probably 3 or 4. It has 2 poison clouds. Poison cloud will add poison, but only take up to a 3 in the size of a dice. And then the blight, which has a countdown of 24 and will inflict double poison. If you had 6 poison on you and you got blighted, you now have 12 poison, which would obviously take a lot of damage on you if you were to stay around for 12 turns. Taking that much damage. You might not last that many turns, but another enemy that if you just can beat the jar fast enough, if you can slow down their rolls, doesn't have any other way to kill you particularly fast. So I don't think it's a very scary enemy to run into. It is strong against poison, which means it takes less damage from poison. If you happen to have a strategy based around poison, but I don't like using poison that much in the game because I don't think it's a very strong way to do damage with poison. Sneezy, it's a hedgehog, has 4 spikes with a countdown of 6, do 3 damage, and a sneeze, which needs doubles, and then reduces the countdown on all equipment by the dice you put in. Sneezy rolls about 3 dice, could do 1 or maybe 2 spikes on a good turn, could reduce the countdown by a little bit. If he rolled 2 6s, he countdowns all 4 spikes and you get hit with 12 damage. Ask me how I know. But still a pretty easy enemy. Little damage he can deal to you relative to some of the other enemies in the game. Baby Squid has a headbutt, which for an even dice will do damage based on the dice, and then you can headbutt twice. The Ink Splat for an odd dice again has 2 uses and can blind a dice. If you get blinded, you can't see a blind dice. So, a bit of a problem. You can't see what numbers you're working with. You have to, you can put a dice into an equipment that requires, say, an even dice, and if it says you can't use it, well, obviously it's an odd dice. So there's a couple of things you can do to figure out. But, you know, suppose the dice is an even dice. It might not be the best option for the equipment that you want to use, and now you've used it. So blind can be a bit of a nuisance to deal with, but the baby squid, unless he just rolls big even dice every turn, is not likely to do very much damage to you. And in fact, there's another enemy that's much stronger and much later in the tier list that makes better use of the blind status. Handyman is an enemy that shows up somewhere around floor 3 usually, has 3 equipment. The spanner combines 2 dice, so if you combine a 2 and a 4 you make a 6, which is good for the handyman. If you put a 5 and a 3, that would be 8, so you get back a 6 and a 2. Hammer, which is like the shovel, it will do open damage, and on 6 it will shock the enemy. So the handyman usually can make a 6, do some damage, shock you, and then put the remaining dice into the pea shooter. For a countdown of 5, it'll do 2 damage. It's an awful equipment. You get it as a starting gear for the robot, and when you get the pea shooter, your goal is to find something better to replace it with as fast as possible. It's just not very much damage every turn. I don't think the handyman is all that much of a problem. And finally, there's the mimic. It disguises itself as a treasure chest, so you can hold your mouse over an enemy or an icon to tell you if it's an enemy, but you might conceivably run into the mimic thinking it's a treasure chest. It has one equipment, the mysterious box, and it uses a die. It uses one die, and then it will give it one of a whole bunch of different types of equipment. It can get things like elemental spells like electric shock or ice shard. It can get a strong fire spell like Inferno. It can get life drain. You can get the hammer or the shovel. There's a lot of things that the mimic can get, and it can get a new piece of equipment every turn. And it has 3 dice, so it almost always gets to use whatever the equipment is. And there's not much you can do to stop it with shock or anything because it has multiple dice. I've run into the mimic once. It certainly could end your run if it gets enough equipment, but I don't think it has that much HP, and it's kind of beholden to whatever equipment it gets, so I don't think the mimic is very strong, which is why I've rated it at the bottom of the D tier. C tier, it's Crummy Cronies. At the top of the C tier is Cornelius. Cornelius has Nightmare. For a countdown of 99, does 999 damage, and Cornelius gets 1 dice every turn. So I have run into this guy once, and if I had a worse time with him, I might have rated him higher, possibly at the B tier, and realistically he might be, but I won against Cornelius, so instead I'm rating him as a C tier enemy. I fought him with the witch. It was kind of a race to the end of the race to see who could get more dice faster, him or myself with the Hall of Mirrors. And I think it might have actually been the upgraded version, so his countdown was like 75. I threw freezes at him, I froze all of his dice, and he got a few bad rolls, so I eventually beat Cornelius. But like I said, freezing is about the only thing you can do to Cornelius, because otherwise he'll just roll enough dice to eventually kill you. Copycat copies your equipment exactly. If you're playing as the Jester, he'll copy whatever your current cards are. Otherwise, he'll copy your equipment layout. This could be a pretty dangerous thing to run into, because whatever your best build is, the copycat can have that too. He can't copy your character specific abilities, so if you're playing as the warrior, he doesn't get the reroll, or the robot, he doesn't get the CPU system at all, so it's not nearly as good as your setup is. A potential risk to run into. Might even consider cutting one of your equipment out so you can make a worse build for him to copy. But at that point, you're making your own strategy worse to try to spite the enemy. So tough to say if that's a good call. Next up, I would say, is the Cactus. The Cactus is the other enemy that uses thorns in this game. Cactus Shield for an odd dice will add 1 thorn, and the Cactus Spear will do even damage and plus 2 damage per thorn. With about 3 dice, the Cactus ideally gets 2 odd dice and 1 even dice. That's 4 thorns plus something like a 4 would be 8 damage, and now you have a couple thorns that you have to deal with as you're attacking the Cactus. And as I've been playing the game, I've had a number of runs, like with the Thief and the Witch especially, where the Cactus gets multiple thorns, and now because both those characters are doing a lot of small attacks on the enemy, the Thief is using the daggers to do a bunch of little hits to the enemy, and the Witch needs the Cauldron, which re-rolls the dice and does 1 damage. And you have these multiple attacks that you're throwing at the Cactus, and each one of them damages you a bunch. And I've just had runs that I lost against the Cactus because I took too much damage from him. Might have a stronger impression of the Cactus than some people, but I've found the Cactus has caused me a lot of problems, and it's funny. The Cactus is so sad about his inability to win fights and to take on anybody, but honestly, buddy, you're doing a lot better than you think. Vacuum has the Blood Drain. For a max of 4, it will drain health from you. It's one of the only equipment in the game that will allow you to drain health from an enemy. And the Dust Cloud, it does open damage, but it will blind 1 dice on a 6. So Vacuum is a little bit of a problem. It can drain your health, it can heal itself a bit, and it can also blind dice and cause a bit of trouble for you while doing damage. But still a bit of a C tier enemy, and not a ton of health either. If you happen to have a way to steal the steel equipment, absolutely, you have to get the you gotta get the Blood Drain from the Vacuum. It's one of the only equipment you can get to heal yourself, and I really like healing equipment in the game. You know, it does damage and heals you, so pretty strong, pretty good, potentially good equipment there. The Rat King is a floor 4 or 5 enemy, but I still don't think it's a very strong enemy. It has 6 rats, and the rat is an equipment that has a countdown of 5. It'll do 1 poison to you, and then it rolls a new dice. With about 3 dice the king has, he could conceivably hit you with 6 poison, but on a bad turn he might only roll 1 or 2. And poison can stack to do a lot of damage, but usually you don't have a problem with the king. Like I said, I don't think poison is a very strong status in the game. Except for that one time I was playing as the Jester, and I totally lost to the king because I was just short 1 or 2 damage away from killing him, and the poison took me out. Paper Knight is another high floor enemy, floor 5, maybe 4. Has 2 equipment. The Cardboard Sword, for an even dice, will do 9 damage, but then it loses 2 damage each use. And Glue, for an odd dice, will lock one of your dice. If your dice is locked, you just can't use it at all. It's locked. It's one of the worst. It's probably the most restrictive status to run into that affects your dice. So you know the Paper Knight has about 2 or 3 dice, is going to get off at least one of those equipment, and in the first 2 turns that's 16 damage. That's a modest amount, could be more, up to 21, but because the sword loses damage each turn, and because running into the Paper Knight at high enough floors where you're probably going to have more dice, the Paper Knight is still not that threatening in my opinion. And she's also weak to fire, so if you have any fire equipment, you incinerate her. Not really that much of a problem for how late in the game the knight can appear. Lastly is the Drain Monster. It's a bit of a rare enemy. I haven't run into it very much. It has 2 slime balls, just like the slime, but it also has the Sinkhole. It's a countdown of 12, and it does 3 weaken to you. So get a bit of poison to stack up. It can weaken you and make it harder for you to use your equipment, but still not much of a threat I had a run in the bonus round where the bonus round will give you rules every time you descend to a new floor, and one of the rules was any enemy can become the boss in the game rather than the 7 bosses the game normally has. And I ran into a boss level drain monster. It had 70 HP, and it still wasn't much of a challenge because it's just not a very strong enemy. Next up, it's Brave Baddies. And how come the marshmallow is so high up on this tier? It's from the floor 2. It shows up on floor 3 sometimes. Marshmallow has 2 equipment, the snowball and the fireball. The snowball does odd damage and freezes a dice. The fireball will do even damage and burn a dice. Best roll the marshmallow could do is a 6 and a 5. It does 11 damage and it burns and it freezes 2 of your dice. And I've seen that roll before. You're mainly hoping the marshmallow will roll 2 even or 2 odd, in which case it only gets to use 1 of its equipment, but there's just something about this enemy. I've wiped in a lot of runs because the marshmallow showed up and I didn't have a good build, and then it killed me because it has the chance to do so much damage for an enemy on that level. There's just something about this thing that gives me more trouble than it's worth, so that's why I put it so high on the B tier. The sorceress has 4 equipment. The 2 of them will be a cauldron. Like I said, the cauldron, you re-roll a dice and do 1 damage. The infliction, which will take any dice and do 3 damage. And then she'll have 2 copies of 1 of 4 of the following spell: fire, ice, electric, or sound spell. Burning light, which takes 4 or higher. The ice shard, which does odd damage. The electric shock, which does even damage. And the sonic wave, which does a maximum of 4. And each of those spells will inflict 1 of their respective status. So the sorceress is re-rolling dice, trying to get enough to put into the 2 stronger spells, and if she gets a dice that's not good for that spell, she'll put it into infliction, which will do a little bit of damage anyway. And for 3 different damaging equipment, that's a decent build for floor 3 usually. So the bully has 4 rocks. A rock it will do open damage, but you can only use it once per battle. So if the bully rolls high, a 4 or higher, he'll throw rocks at you. Otherwise, he uses fists, which takes any dice, does 3 damage, and has 2 uses. And I've definitely wiped to the bully for how much damage he does, but it all depends on what his rolls are. And again, you can freeze his dice to reduce the damage, but he's always going to do some damage to you because of the equipment he's got. Warlock is an enemy I don't run into very often. Has 2 equipment. The shooting star will do odd damage plus confuse. Confuse is a pretty unique status. It causes all of your equipment to be randomized and obscured. So you might have the sword, which will do open damage, and you would only see the slot for the dice. If you had, say, the ice shard, which requires an odd dice, it would tell you requires an odd, and based on what your equipment looks like, you might have a way to figure out what some of your equipment is based on the dice it requires. But confuse is still a bit of an irritation because you might mistake one equipment for the other and put dice in the wrong place. The other one is Dark Shadow, which does even damage plus inflicts 2 random statuses on you. Be poisoned and frozen. You could be weakened and burned. Going to definitely do one of those, at least one of those per turn. And the variety of statuses he could inflict on you could cause a lot more problems. The next couple of enemies I have the Snowman and Yeti, very similar ice-based enemies. Snowman has 4 snowballs. which will do odd damage and freeze the dice. The Yeti has 2 ice shards, again, odd damage, freeze 1 dice, and the Yeti also has Ice Age, requires 2 ones, which will freeze all your dice. So you could potentially try inflicting freeze on the Yeti, but then he can freeze all your dice, and you are probably worse off with frozen dice than the Yeti would be. You could also freeze the snowman's dice, do less damage to you, but you know, if the snowman rolls a 6 or a 4 or something, then that's a missed dice. So you could potentially be helping the snowman by freezing his dice. And they have these are higher floor enemies. They have a decent amount of HP. I think the snowman is stronger because he has more equipment than the Yeti, but both of them are of decent potential damage output, unless of course you have a fire equipment, in which case they're weak to that and you can take them out pretty quickly. They could also just roll poorly and then they can't do anything. Fireman is pretty similar to some of these other guys. He has 2 fireballs, which is the same equipment as the hothead, even damage plus 1 burn, but the fireman has 2 of them and also has 4 dice, so he's pretty likely to roll a couple of even dice, burn some of your dice, and cause some problems for you if you don't have an ice equipment. Cause problems especially if you don't have ice equipment, which he's weak to, and obviously if you froze his dice, he can't do anything with them because a fireball requires even dice. These 3 enemies, they're pretty swingy in terms of their difficulty. They can either be incredibly easy or they might totally wipe you, depending on what equipment you have. When I'm given the choice, I'm usually either take ice or fire equipment, because each of those elements has the most enemies that are potentially weak to them. So it's kind of just a gamble of whether I'm looking for enemies that are weak to fire or ice. On the other hand, I don't think burn is a very good status to be inflicting, and freeze is certainly useful for a lot of other enemies, because you can slow the countdown on their equipment, you can reduce the rolls they get, so it might even just be useful to pick ice equipment more often than fire. You know, you've got fire weak enemies like the Wicker Man and the Paper Knight, which I don't think are very strong anyway, but then it hits the ice enemies, which I think are decent. And the last enemy I put on this tier is the Bounty Hunter. I might have overvalued this enemy. It's a rare one. Has the electromagnet. It's a countdown of 7. Does 4 damage, but it'll do plus 2 more damage each use. So that is a potential for quite a lot of damage. Also has the Yoink, which takes an even dice and then steals 1 equipment that you have for that turn. So it'll steal an equipment, and then your turn comes around and you can't use it because he's borrowing it. And it's funny because there's a little I'm borrowing this note wherever you left it. Then it moves on to the bounty hunter's next turn, and he'll probably end up stealing another one. Hunter gets a lot of electromagnets. The damage could rack up and he could steal something really good from you, but despite the possibility for a lot of damage and really screwing up your run, the bounty hunter doesn't show up very often, and I still think he's probably a lot less likely to threaten you than all of the other enemies in this tier. Oh boy, next up it's Amazing Adversaries. I debated about the placement of the Wisp, which is the enemy I put up at the top of the A tier list. It might, I actually put it up in S, but I think I might be overvaluing it for having run into it recently. Wisp has 2 Burning Light, which do take 4 or higher and do damage, fire damage plus 1 burn. So big dice go into the burning light and they burn your dice, and the wisp is also strong against fire, which means fire won't do very much damage against him. It also has Fool's Fire, which is a countdown of 12 and inflicts Vanish. If you have Vanish, it will cause you to lose duplicate dice. So a roll of 1, 6, 1 would cause you to lose the 1. And if you had any ways to modify dice, you could re-roll a number that was a duplicate of a dice and you lose that one as well. It's the only enemy that has Vanish in the entire game. Certainly a risk you run into. I had another bonus round episode where I chose a rule that doubles the rate of countdown equipment, and I ran into the wisp on this floor, and then I realized that I had sealed my fate by choosing the quick countdown rule, and the wisp was doing too much damage and getting Vanish in one turn. So that might have inflated my opinion of how strong it is, but I still think it's a potentially dangerous enemy to run into with that unique status. Next one is the Cowboy, which again might be a little out of place or out of order, but the Cowboy is a floor 4 or 5 enemy. Has a Midnight Charm. For a countdown of 10 will roll 2 6s, and then the 6 shooter, which needs exactly a 6, will do 6 damage and can be used 3 times. So Cowboy could roll a 6, and then 2 dice that add up to 10 could or could build up the countdown over a turn. 2 dice means he'll probably get the charm off in 1 or 2 turns unless he's rolling terribly, and then does up to 18 damage, which can be quite a lot for 1 turn. So Cowboy could shoot you dead right there if he gets high enough rolls. Crystallina is a funny one. It has 4 Crystal Eyes, which is a countdown of 6 that makes a random crystal weapon. Can turn into a bunch of different crystals. Earth, air, fire, ice. Those inflict status like weaken for the earth crystal or shock for the air crystal. The life crystal heals. The hollow crystal will do open damage. The smoky crystal will curse you, and the power crystal will give the crystallina a random positive status. You're trying to freeze its dice so its rolls become as small as possible, reduce the chance that it can make all those weapons, because with something like 4 dice, if it gets all of its crystals, the thing could be doing an awful lot of damage to you and also inflicting a bunch of effects on you. I'm always a little bit nervous running into this thing, just because it depends on how good its dice rolls are. But freeze or even shock might be enough to defeat it. Keymaster has a lock of 1 through 6, so a lock that requires a 1 through a lock that requires a 6. Keymaster will roll a dice, unlock it, and it becomes a Keyblade, which does 3 damage and then returns the dice. So ideally every turn, Keymaster is rolling a different dice and unlocking another Keyblade, and then he can use every one of them that turn. So by the time he gets 3, 4 or more equipment unlocked, you might already be dead from how many hits he gets. And the Keyblade is a great equipment to pick up if you ever run into it, but as similar as the Keymaster is to the Crystallina, this guy just has never given me much trouble. Freeze his dice, you can hit him with a shock, which might disable whatever equipment he has the dice roll for. Possibility to do a lot of damage, but only if he rolls right, and if you can't kill him fast enough. Dire Wolf has 2 Poison Claws, which do a max 3 damage. Take a max 3 dice to do damage, and then 1 poison. Stacks up a bit of poison, and then the Dire Wolf Howl, which requires doubles and curses you. If you're cursed, you have a 50% chance to fail whatever equipment you're using that turn. So you place your dice in the equipment, it's cursed, you lose both the equipment and the dice that turn, and then the curse goes away. I think curse might be the worst status to be inflicted within the game. You just roll the dice hoping that you get to use your equipment. You might even try to trigger the curse on some weaker equipment so that you can get it to activate, so that you can guarantee you use your other equipment. But what if the curse doesn't trigger? Now you have to guess. Now you have to risk the stronger equipment again to see if that one works. And curse sucks to run into. There's a couple of curse enemies, and I rate most of them pretty high on the list just for the ability to curse you. Aurora is an enemy that I might have had one really bad run in the first time I ran into her, but probably haven't had that much trouble with the Aurora recently. Still a floor 4 or 5 enemy. She has 3 weather abilities. Countdown to 5, do 3 damage, and inflict a 1 status. So Heat Wave for burn, Snowstorm for freeze, Thunderstorm for shock, and then Hurricane for lock. Then she uses the Mood Change, which will give her a new set of weather abilities and heal for 3 HP. Has somewhere around 45 or maybe even 50 HP, so it could take quite a few turns to take her out. Gives her a lot of chances to inflict damage and lots of statuses on you. Might heal a couple turns, but still not the worst enemy to run into even in this A tier. And the last one that I would rate is the Singer. Has the two sad verses, which is an imitation of the Sonic Wave from Radiohead. Max 4 damage plus 1 weaken. And then there's High Note, which is a countdown of 20 and does 12 damage, which is kind of a lot of damage to do in one attack. Now I look at Singer's moveset, I think that doesn't seem like that much damage, but Singer has definitely ended my runs and caused some close calls before for how much damage she can do in one turn or 2. And especially with enemies this high on the list, I'm talking about floor 4 or 5 enemies. They have 40 to even 50 HP, which could take quite a while to take them out. This is Superlative Stooges. I am actually going to read these enemies off in the reverse order, starting with the lowest enemy on the tier all the way up to the strongest enemies. The Skeleton is one that I was given pause for, whether it was going to go up here, this high. But the Skeleton has the two-handed sword, which take any 2 open dice. Could do as much as 12 damage, which is quite a lot. And also has Shriek, which needs exactly a 2 and will curse you. So any enemy that curses you gives me pause before fighting it, and it can do quite a lot of damage with the sword. So bit of a challenge if you run into it on the last floor. Banshee has 2 times Lament, which does open damage but plus freeze on 6. I thought that was a guaranteed freeze, but no, it's like the shovel or the hammer, where it only inflicts a status on 6. But more of a problem is that the Banshee can inflict Wail, which requires a 5 and silences you, and Shriek, which is curse for a 2, like the Skeleton. Curse is an awful enough status to run into, and the Lament and the 2 Lament spells do decent damage, but Silence is even nastier, and it's less common, but might be even worse than Curse. If you're silenced, your entire character's ability kit is locked out, so the Warrior doesn't get to use their reroll ability. The Witch can't place any dice on the spellbook, and now you have to rely on the prepared spells you have for a turn in order to attack. And you also lose the ability to use your Limit Break. you're just completely silenced, and you can only use your attacks. You can spend 2 dice to break your silence, but that's a huge investment for any character, especially for the witch. I'd say it's not even worth it. So you have a really neutered turn where you can only do whatever moves you have prepared, and you can't use your limit break either. Banshee has maybe 4 or even 5 dice, so seems to have a pretty good chance of rolling one or both of those abilities every turn, even though they require an exact number to activate them, making Banshee, I think, a pretty scary enemy to run into. The Rhino Beetle is one of the scariest to run into as far as I'm concerned. Has a battle axe which takes a maximum of 4 on a dice, but it will do times 2 damage. So it can do as much as 8 damage, and then it has Beetle Headbutt, which is a countdown of 12 to do 5 damage and lock 1 dice. So getting a good roll on the battle axe, it could do a lot of damage, it could count down, it could headbutt you, and then it does more damage and locks your dice. So the beetle definitely has ended some of my runs, caused a lot of close calls as well. Pretty straightforward character. Freezes dice if you have a chance, and that's about the only thing you can do, except the ones will still do 2 damage if he places it in the battle axe. Number 3 on this list is Gargoyle. That's the 3rd strongest enemy. I could rearrange the tier list a little bit, but I had a lot of cases where I was quibbling about the exact placement of enemies, even in a given tier list, even in a given tier. I will just call the Gargoyle number 3. Has 4 Avalanche, which for a minimum of 3 will do 3 damage and then re-roll the dice with a lower value. So rolls about 2 dice, can just keep hitting you with rocks that re-roll until they're too low to use on the Avalanche. And then he has Glare, which needs a 1 exactly and locks the dice, and it has 2 uses. So potentially a lot of damage in 1 turn, and then locks your dice so you can't use them. You're praying that the Gargoyle rolls a 2, which is the only number that you can't use for anything. Could potentially freeze his dice, and now he can only lock yours, but then you have fewer dice to do damage to him. I've had some bad losses to the Gargoyle. I've had a lot of close calls where I got out by the skin of my teeth from just the Gargoyle getting the wrong rolls. Number 2, this is the Kraken. It's the enemy I mentioned that was much more threatening with blind. Fitting that it's a bigger squid. Kraken has 3 equipment. Let's see, the Kraken has Overwhelm, requires an even dice, does 1 damage, add 1 damage each use, and it has 2 uses. So could roll 2 even dice, do 3 damage total, and over a couple turns the Overwhelm could get pretty strong. Kraken has like 5 dice, so it can roll a lot of them to guarantee it gets enough dice for all its moves. The Camouflage is a countdown of 5 and then blinds 2 dice, and then the Deep Sea Howl is like the Direwolf's move, where it requires a 4 and curses you. So every turn you're hoping that the Kraken doesn't roll a 4 so it can't curse you, and if it does, you're hoping that you get enough of your moves off safely without the curse going off. The blind actually ends up becoming a lot bigger problem against an enemy like this, because trying to take out the Kraken as fast as possible, it's slowing down your progress because you can't make the most optimal moves for what dice you're placing in, and that's if you aren't cursed and you don't don't have to deal with a chance of just failing. Kraken is always a threat to me when I run into it, and definitely ended some of my runs and had a lot of close scrapes with this thing. But the Kraken is only the second strongest enemy, because there's one that's stronger than that. It's the champion of the dungeon. Probably more of a problem than some of the bosses. It's the Loudbird, which is everybody's favorite enemy in this game. Loudbird has 3 moves. Squawk needs doubles, but it inflicts silence on you. Flight needs an even dice, but it dodges, and then Echo Blast requires an odd dice, and will do 2 weaken. So the bird is squawking at you, locking you out from your character's kit. It's getting dodges to make it so that you can attack it less, and then it's weakening your equipment and making it harder to defeat. I know there are a lot of people who don't like the Loudbird, say it's unfair. It certainly might be. It's not any fun to run into. I think there's a mod that just completely cuts out the Loudbird from the game, which I think is kind of funny. But Loudbird definitely voted the worst enemy to run into in the game. Silencing, being able to dodge, weakening your equipment, that's a really bad combination of things to throw at you. If I ever ran into like a boss level Loudbird or Kraken, that might actually be worse than some of the real bosses in this game. But I did list the bosses at the highest tier, and because bosses are randomized, I presume every run, it's a total toss-up which one you run into. It has the pocket knife, which takes a maximum of 3 for roll. It will do +1 damage to whatever dice you put into it, and you can use it 3 times. So you put in a 3 and it'll do 4 damage, and you can reuse it. The chocolate cookie has a countdown of about 12 and gives fury, and the campfire takes an even dice, does 1 damage plus 1 burn, and then adds 1 damage each use. So Madison has a tasty chocolate cookie. She shanks you with a pocket knife and then throws your body into the campfire. I've only started running into her as a boss recently, which might affect how strong I think the boss is, but I've decided to give this one the rank of the strongest boss. Number 2, I think, is Beatrice. Has 4 times Bee Sting, which is a countdown of 5, does 4 damage and 1 shock. Could roll multiple stings in a turn, locking you out of equipment, and then has a flight ability, which is for, again, like the Loudbird, needs an even dice and lets you dodge. Definitely has the chance to get a lot of damage on you, slow down your progress because of how much you're getting shocked, and has the chance to dodge and attack, which slows down your progress even more. I've decided that number 3 and one of the better bosses overall is Buster, which has a dragon with 4 times fire breath. That's an equipment that does a countdown of 5, does 4 damage and 1 burn. At max level, you have 44 HP, which means it takes probably around 8 or 9 fire breaths from Buster to take you out, especially since you're going to be taking the damage from burned dice. No sense in leaving the burned dice on the table, because that gives Buster more chances to hit you with more damage. Buster is the first boss I ran into in the game. I assume he's meant to be the first boss. He's the tutorial boss, but I've actually never checked that myself. Definitely a little bit of a challenge. I have lost to Buster in one run, and a pretty bad loss. Pretty simple boss to run into, and also one that, despite ranking him as one of the stronger bosses, it's not really that threatening to run into. Never really concerned when I run into Buster. Freeze his dice, and you can make him roll lower and he has a harder time damaging you. Freeze is definitely a pretty good status to inflict. For an enemy like this who has a whole bunch of the same equipment, shock doesn't do very much good for you. After this is a boss that I've run into quite a lot lately, and I've actually been mispronouncing her name. It's Skahach. Is 6 different equipment, 1 for each dice roll. She has 1 dice, and she is immune to lock and freeze, so you can't control her rolls with status, which makes sense with only 1 dice. There's 6 spells. There's the curse, which takes a 1 and does 1 extra damage. The wind, which does 2 damage, takes a 2 and does 2 damage, and it goes all the way up to so the curse, it curses you. The wind, it locks dice. The shadow takes a 3 and does 3 extra damage and blinds 3 dice. The cold takes a 4, does 4 extra damage and freezes 4 dice. The ashes takes a 5 and does 5 extra damage and burns 5 dice, and the storm takes a 6, does 6 extra damage and shocks you for 6. So inflicts a bunch of statuses and does extra damage depending on the rolls. If she rolled a lot of 5s and 6s, she could probably kill you pretty quickly with how much damage she does. But yeah, I've run into this boss quite a bit recently, but still not one I'm usually very concerned about for how variable her turns go. If you could dodge her attack, then she couldn't do anything because she only has 1 dice, which is something I managed to pull off once. There's one little detail that bothers me about the boss. There's a cool thing where all ice equipment takes odd dice, burn or fire equipment takes even dice, and Skahach breaks that trend by putting the cold requires a 4 and the ashes requires a 5, which is backwards, but I suppose it's fine for a boss. Next boss, and one of the lower on the tier list, is Aoife. Has a tower shield, which is a max 5, gives you as much as 5 shield for the dice you put into it. Has 2 uses. The broadsword, which is the same equipment that the frog has, open damage plus 2, and charge, which is takes countdown of 12 and then does damage equal to how much shield she has. So using a big sword, stacking up a lot of shield against you, and then damaging you for the shield she has, as well as using the shield to reduce damage. But I just decided Aoife isn't that much of a problem to fight. Most of the bosses don't, I think, pose that much of a problem, especially if you're able to level up and heal right before the fight. The only real problem you have is if you get bad rolls, you make a really stupid mistake, or you are injured and can't get full health right before the boss. Like if you're skipping a few enemies here and there to try to get to the boss faster or avoid fights that might take you out earlier. One of the last bosses on this list is Audrey. She has the headbutt, which is the same as the baby squid. Requires an even dice, even damage, and can be used twice this turn. And she also has Earthquake, which is like the Drain Monster's Sinkhole. It is a countdown of 10, does 3 weaken and 6 damage. So might get that off every turn, every other turn. Get a couple of headbutts on you for some damage, but another boss that has a lot of potential to kill you quickly if she gets good rolls, but otherwise you defeat her faster than she defeats you, especially if you can inflict freeze. And then she can't do anything. The last boss that I rank on this list is Drake. Drake has Blood Suck, which is like the vacuum, restores up to 4 HP and damages you for the same. It also has Smog Cloud, which is a countdown of 15 and deals 3 poison and 3 blind. So, bit of a nuisance to obscure your dice, drain some health from you, but I still think is the weakest boss. Poison isn't a very strong status, and blind is only a nuisance rather than something that will stop you entirely from playing. The biggest problem that Drake poses is you can only kill him with a wooden stake. If you run into Drake as your boss of choice, you have to build the wooden stake into your equipment, which means you lose something. The wooden stake has a countdown of 5, and then it does a countdown of 40, and then it does 5 damage. And Drake can only lose his last 5 HP to the wooden stake. If you play as a witch, you have to replace one of your spells with it, so the ideal strategy, I think, is to get his HP as low as you can, start the countdown for the wooden stake, and then as soon as you get him at low enough HP, you can stake him, except for the fact that he can restore HP with blood drain, so that makes a bit more of a problem to deal with Drake, but not nearly enough to make him all that difficult. Had an absolutely catastrophic loss with the Inventor against Drake once, but even then I had to sit there and wait for multiple turns for him to stack enough poison to kill me, so not very scary to deal with Drake. And the last boss you fight is the Jester, which is a temporary enemy you run into anyway. Jester will show up in the first episode for the Warrior, the second episode for the Thief, etc. until you run into him as the 5th for the Witch, and then as a 4-5 enemy for the Witch, and then you fight him as a boss. If you beat him in all encounters, he will become a playable character, and that's how you get the 6th character. Jester uses an absolutely enormous variety of equipment across every encounter you run into him. You can look him up on the wiki. It'll tell you exactly what equipment he has every time you fight him. And he will actually change equipment, so every turn he'll change into something new. Jester is probably the enemy you run into Confuse the first time, because he can inflict Confuse on you. He can use Thorns, actually, which is the last case of an enemy that can inflict Thorns. But despite how much different equipment he has and the fact that you have to run into him a couple times, he's a set encounter in all these character screens. It's just I've been playing games so long that it's been a while since I've had to fight the Jester, but I never had trouble with him before, and I don't imagine that he's usually going to be that much of trouble to fight, unless you are weakened from another enemy or you're unlucky with your dice rolls, like a lot of enemies. So that's why I put Jester as the weakest boss or enemy, just because you can fight him as either an enemy or a boss. Alright, thank you for listening. I had a lot of fun thinking about these enemies and trying to figure out how I would rate each of their encounters. I do have a lot of small changes I could make about the order that different enemies go in any given tier, but I wanted to just make the tier list. So these are my my rankings for enemies, and I can actually put all the notes I made on the enemies' equipment in the description if you're interested in reading them, but you can find the equipment that any enemy will use on the Dicey Dungeons wiki.